Welcome to the Indie KidLit podcast. Join Marti Dumas and Elena Page on their quest to help children's and middle grade authors find the right audience and sell more books. Hi, and welcome to the Indie KidLit podcast. I'm Marti Dumas.
And I'm Elena Page. Welcome back to the show after we took a little break over January and some of February, mainly because it's summer here in Australia and I begged Marti to give me summer vacation time. So thank you, Marti.
Master, but and then also it's super nice to be able to start back on the Lunar New Year, which is pretty much what we're doing. Nice. We're just like a couple of hours shy of it when this episode will air. So very cool.
Very cool. And we're happy to be back. We're definitely committed to bringing you more wonderful shows, and we're hitting off this year with a very super exciting guest, the one and only, very infamous. I probably don't even need to introduce him to you guys because I'm sure you know him. It is Bryan Cohen, but I will give you a quick introduction, Bryan. So Bryan, for those of you that may not have heard of him because you live under a rock, that's fine, is one of the talented hosts of the Sell More Books Show podcast. He also runs the Best Page Forward, which provides premium book descriptions and author training because he is a copyright extraordinaire, one of the main reasons we're talking to him today. And he's the author of several fiction and non-fiction books, notably the YA series, The Viral Superhero, which we will also be talking about today. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Thank you two so much for having me. I'm glad I get to kick off after your break and give some good information today.
And I've got to say, you are cute as a button. Seeing
oh my gosh.
Person.
You are like bent and determined on making your husband make us quit the podcast. That is fantastic.
I have a very good marriage, everybody, just so, which is why I'm a terrible flirt, because we have such a good relationship. It's the opposite. But you really are. I just want to squeeze your cheeks.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm sure you appreciate that. So Bryan, thank you. We're really excited to have you on the show. One of the things that we have a, and we recommend that everyone has a small group of authors that they talk to on a regular basis. So we have a small group of authors that we talk to on a regular basis online, a Facebook group. And one of the things that comes up often is having the group critique your blurb, putting your blurb up and like having the group have at your blurb, which we find to be a super useful exercise. But I fear that we may not be expert enough to really be helpful to the people who are in our group. So we do often refer them to like the free materials that you have online and also your paid books about this. But I would love it if you could just give us a little information about how you got into the blurb business. I don't know if that's a thing that people decide that when they grow up, they want to be in the blurb business. Like we should put that in a children's book. And then B, what are the big things that you tell potential clients? Like what are the big things that you say, here are the things that you need or that you're missing from not having a professional kind of help you through this process?
Great question. How did I get into the blurb business when I was a kid? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a blurbologist for sure. So when before I started self-publishing, even around maybe the beginning of the time I was blogging, this is about 2008, coming up on 10 years on that. It's crazy, making us all feel old. Yeah. And so I could say I've been doing this for 10 years. I was doing copywriting on the side, writing blog posts, writing articles, writing whatever it is I could do to pay the bills. And while I was trying to build up kind of my website and then later in 2010, when I started to self-publish, I was doing a lot of copywriting. And even as I continued to I put out books. My first book was a nonfiction book of creative writing prompts for people of all ages. And as I started self-publishing, while I was able to make some money, it wasn't necessarily enough to live off of. And so I continued to do copywriting. I continued to write different types of articles for people. And I'd been doing it for years, for I guess about 4 to 6 years, at the point where I really needed something else. I think work with a certain client had gone down, and it was my number one source of copy income at that point. And a friend of mine, former podcaster in the indie space, Simon Whistler of the Rocking Self-Publishing podcast. We were in a mastermind similar to you. You have your group. He was in a group of mine. And he said, look, man, in a British accent, he said, look, man, you've got all this copywriting you've been doing, but you've also got this author business. What if you did copywriting for authors? And I thought, oh, this is a fantastic idea. Of course. Why didn't I think of that myself?
Like, duh, right?
Yeah. And we don't always think of the good ideas ourselves. We have to keep giving credit. And so within a week, I had a sales page up, and said, because I needed the money. And so I set up the sales page, promoted it on, as you mentioned, I'm the co-host of Sell More Book Show, promoted it there. And that was the beginning of me being in the blurb business. That was mid 2014, I believe, maybe 2015. The years, they all mash together, but especially when you're a parent, that gives you can't remember what day it is anymore. But I sold about 100 book descriptions in a month. And so I knew people are interested in this. A lot of people struggle with this. And so I started writing these, and I learned a lot from the early people that I worked with. I improved significantly over time, raised my prices, continued to get business. So I guess people were still interested in it. And so now I've worked with, and this is me and a team now, we've worked with over 850 book descriptions. We're approaching 900, approaching 1,000. It's pretty wild. And so I know that was a lot, but it was only the first half of your question. So
yeah,
I can answer the second half. I want to see if you had any thoughts on the first half.
No, that's amazing. I want you to keep going.
Keep going. I can keep going. I can keep going for a long time. So
yeah, we talk a lot, but we don't always get to hang out with you. So
okay, good, fair enough. I like hanging out with you guys as well. So as I learned and grew through this, I really started to understand that there are certain parts of the book description, of the blurb, that are the most important, that require the most attention. And really, a lot of it comes down to having success right out of the gate. That first line, there is a statistic that has gone around in copywriting, and I've said copywriting a lot, but for the purposes of an author, these are the words outside of your book. You've got the words inside your book, obviously the book you've written, and the books and pictures you've written and illustrated, and the words outside of your book. These could be the words on the back of your paperback or hardcover book. It could be the words that are on your Amazon sales page online or any other place that you sell. It could be the words you use in an advertisement that sends people to your book. So that's what copy is. And in copywriting, there's a statistic that 80% of people stop reading after the first line of your copy. And that doesn't mean that 80% of people will go away right away. They're not going to ever look at your book again. But it does mean that 80% of people make a decision at that point. 80% of people decide, I'm going to keep reading, or I'm going to buy the book, or I'm leaving. I'm clicking away. I'm searching for something else. So we have a very short period of time to reach 80% of the people. It comes from having a very, very successful, I like to call it a headline, but it could be called a log line, a tagline, whatever. You have a very short amount of time to establish a very strong headline that does a few things. It appeals to people in that genre. Obviously, if you're writing a kid's book and it sounds like a hard-boiled detective thriller, it's probably not going to do as well. And you have to make sure it sounds interesting, but you also don't want to give so much information about every character's name and everything that people just feel like they need like a glossary to even handle this book. So you have to do a lot in that first line. And that's why lately I've really tried to direct people's attention, because not everyone's going to spend $197 on getting a book description for me. It's just not in the budget for everybody. I totally understand that. Maybe not even everyone will buy a $2.99. I forget how much my book even is. $2.99, $3.99 book on writing a synopsis. But if I can tell you one piece of advice out there, it's that first line has just so much of an effect on if people are going to potentially buy your book. So don't even at the first point, don't even worry about the whole description. Let's think about that first line first.
Yeah.
How do you craft that first line? That's the,
that is the challenge.
Yeah, that's the thing.
That is the challenge. And there's not an easy answer to that, unfortunately. There is a practice makes permanent answer, which is you improve on your skills of copywriting, of knowing what good copy sounds like here in the States and really throughout the world. But I know that it's mostly focused on in the States. We just saw the Super Bowl. And during the Super Bowl, which was won by my Philadelphia Eagles, by the way. So
excellent work.
Thank you. I did everything I could to help.
I'm sure you had the mojo going. I know it was you.
Exactly. And so during the Super Bowl, there's always a lot of talk about the ads, about the commercials. And during some of these commercials, there were fabulous lines of copy. My favorite in particular was David Harbour from Stranger Things, talking about how every ad, if it has clean clothes in it, is a Tide ad. So there was hashtag, it's a Tide ad. And conceptually, that commercial is great. But that line of copy, it's a Tide ad, was just so effective. And it's very hashtagable. And we need to, as authors, remember, we're running a business. We have certain skills we need to get better at. And if we're going to improve at copywriting, we need to look at copy. We need to look at these commercials. We need to read the magazine ads. We can't just flip past all of them. We need to look at this copy and realize what we like about it, almost as if when we were reading our first kids' books, to get a feel for our genre. We read those YA books. We read those picture books. We read those middle grade books to get a feel for it. When you're trying to write better copy, well, you need to read copy to start internalizing it. So that's the first step. First and foremost, I would say when you're trying to write that better first line, look at the strongest one-liners in advertising and start to get a feel for what makes this good and how could it improve what I'm doing with my copy.
Very cool. So I have to tell you that we have bought now 6 copies of Sizzlin' Synopsis.
Nice.
Yes, because we have like a tiny little, like a micro publisher, and we're wanting to be able to make sure that all the things that we do kind of kind of goes with that. And I found it super helpful. But even before that, the first book in my main series, like I had been up for a little while and it was doing okay. Like it was definitely selling copies, but not a ton, but like who expects to sell a ton of copies of like a children's chapter book? Like, I didn't have high expectations. And then another member of our little group said to me, just randomly one day, he says, I was checking out your Amazon page and your synopsis is terrible. But your book looks great. So maybe you want to fix that. And I was like, oh, dude, okay. After I like wiped the hurt away, I was like, okay, like what do I do? And exactly, right. And he was like, oh, well, just Google Bryan Cohen. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a thing. That's a thing to. So then I looked in and just like from the information that you had like available like for free online, like I revamped my synopsis on that book and it started selling like crazy. Like it made a huge difference. So then like since then, like when you put stuff out, I buy stuff and I make sure that the rest of my team has your stuff because that was super helpful for me. So I'm wondering, like, as you've now like hit about, you're saying you're coming up on 1,000, like how often are like children's and middle grade authors coming to you? And are there things that you do differently when you're looking at being able to target that audience than you do for other age categories?
That's a great question. And I'm so glad that you looked into some of the materials I've put out and then it really helped your sales. That warms my heart, of course. So that's great. And it shows that it works. Yay, it works. It works. Okay. So when you're working on middle grade, when you're working on, I would say maybe young adult as opposed to upper YA, and of course, children's books, you need to think about who has the credit card. You need to think about who's making the payment. And more often than not, it is not the person who is going to be maybe the primary reader of that book. And so you have to remember that. And while I feel as though in some ways these kinds of descriptions are not different, you still want a really strong headline. You still really want a synopsis that is character focused and compelling. So we've got the character is established before you get into any of the plot, because that way people care about the plot. If there was a, this mysteries, I guess it's a middle grade mystery series that my team worked on recently. And we've got these two kids who get trapped in a little weird world and have to solve puzzles to make their way out of it. We could have not named the kids. We could have not established them. We could have done all of that and just talked about the puzzles. But if you establish that these kids are people before you go into any of the puzzles and the problem solving and any of that, it makes it more personalized. And so even in a book that is, definitely overt in its attempt to teach, it's still about the characters. It's still about people resonating with the characters. But when you get to the point of telling people reminding people what the book is, which, as you guys know, I like to call the selling paragraph, where you say you've gotten through the synopsis and you're trying to remind people who might be on 6 different windows on Amazon, and they've got their phone and they're telling their kids to quiet down and they've got the TV on, so distracted. You almost need to bring people back to your sales page and what your main message is, which is you want them to buy this book. So you tell them this book is a middle grade action adventure for puzzle lovers. So they say, oh, okay, my kid loves that. That's what they're thinking in the back of their head. And then you say, what I like to go into the adjectives of why this book is great. And I do it in a proven formula that BookBub was so nice as to do some some studies on. If you like this, this, and this, then you'll love this author's book. And so you, for middle grade, for lower YA, for chapter books, or for children's books, if you and your child like, instead of just if you like, because who cares if you as a parent like puzzle books, but your kid doesn't? The kid needs to like it as well. So that's really one of the slight changes I make there. And then with the adjectives, instead of it just being like edge of your seat action or sizzling chemistry, would not go well in a children's book. But you are going to kind of lean things more educational. So if you like problem solving activities, if you and your child like strong messages about family, you want to kind of gear those aspects of your selling paragraph to the parent specifically because they have the credit card, but also include in the language the child, because you don't want a parent to say, I like that, but my child doesn't. So that is how I make it different. It's mostly the same because thankfully, for the purposes of me having a description writing business, but all of you out there writing your own descriptions don't change that much. Obviously, in different genres, you emphasize different things, but fortunately, it's not so different that you need to learn a whole new practice when you are writing for children's books, middle grade or lower YA.
Right. So it sounds like mostly that the selling paragraph, remember who you're selling to.
Exactly.
All right.
That's tricky, yeah, because well, I've got to get like a few different, like, the disparity between a parent and a child, and they've both got to meld together. That's hard. Yeah. That's tough.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it's not always going to be a perfect melding, but the parent at least needs to think that those things are what they want to instill in their child, even if their child may hate everything.
Yeah, I was lying in bed this morning.
Even parents with kids who hate everything still buy things for their kids. So.
I was lying in bed this morning actually pondering how all those fart books do so well for children. And, what do parents think when they look at the description and go, oh, Johnny's going to love this fart book? How do you write the synopsis for something like that? Like, is it just going to be funny? Because that's really what you're aiming for. You're aiming for the humor. Yeah.
You want to make sure that the tone of your book description matches the tone of your book. And so if it's silly as all get out and has the ridiculousness of farts on every page or something, then you need to play that up. And I think that if you have an outrageous book, you need to be willing to show off that outrageous tone in the description, because I was working on a description with my co-writer, Abigail, who also helps with the Sell More Book Show. And there was a description that was pretty pretty thriller-esque the whole way through. And then in the selling paragraph, she used the word quirky. And that threw me for a whole loop because I said, hold on. There was nothing quirky in this entire description. So either the quirky was the wrong word, or we need to go back to step one and say, we need to emphasize the quirkiness.
We got to quirky it up.
What?
That's it. We have to quirky it up.
Quirky it up. We got to up the quirk factor. Yeah, exactly. So because the fart book is silly and outrageous, we need to make sure our description, maybe not the whole thing being silly and outrageous, but we need to know that we need to feel it in order to make sure that the book description is fitting the book that we want people to go buy.
Okay, that's great advice. I'm so glad I asked that. Another question, sort of a bit like veering off to the left or right, whichever, is like, for example, one of my series, and I'm sorry that I'm using it as an example, but it's like well, it's like stories, right? And story adventures, just like a fiction book, but it's essentially like a guided meditation. Still crazy and adventuring, but it's technically like a lot of other authors will say, oh, that book sells because it's non-fiction. And then I'm like, is it? So, you know, like when you write the blurb, do you need to know which camp it's sort of like you're heading towards, like making it more non-fiction and appealing to parents that way, or making it sound really kooky? I'll give you, just to extend my question, like my Amazon ads, I had them for a while running with this really sort of, you know, like if you want your kids to be focused and concentrate, buy this book. And then recently I changed them to, you know, like if you want to, you know, eat funny munchies and giggling, you know, anyway, the silly stuff that's in there kind of. And I noticed a difference in how it, like the uptake, and I thought, oh my God, which way do I go? Or yeah, over to you as the expert.
Well, that is why we test. It's good that you tested both. Did you see a difference in sales? Did you see more sales with one method over the other?
I saw really good sales initially with the sort of non-fiction take, but they started to sort of like fall off. And then I changed it. I probably should be running both ads at once, which is great advice. Changed it to the more silly one, and then it picked up. And I thought, oh, yeah. Now I don't know if that's because of what's happening in the world, and you know, like all of that can play a part, can't it? Like it's not just as simple as what's going to appeal today is going to appeal tomorrow, even to the same audience. But right, testing, keep going.
Definitely test it, but also you need to kind of decide who you want as those target readers, because if you emphasize the silliness, you might lose some of the nonfiction-y types. If you emphasize the nonfiction, you might lose some of the silly types. But I will say in general, if you have a book that is, say, trying really, really teaching, like it's almost more of a memoir type book, I like to combine the fiction aspects of that because it is a story, but it also is teaching. And so when I do a nonfiction description, there's a couple sections I like to add. When it's a memoir, I only really add the benefits, kind of the, not just if you do this, this thing will happen, but kind of jumping from A to C. Like if you get rid of, this book will teach you to get rid of debt so you can pay off your credit cards. No, we skipped that. Pay off that wonderful vacation that you've been wanting to go on. So it's kind of that transformational benefit. And that's something that we'll put into a memoir type thing. And that could work for a book like yours, especially since it's kind of on the guided meditation front. But you have to test, you have to play, you have to try lots of different things because we don't always know what works. I'm, you've said like the expert, but not everything I try for my books works. Certainly I can say there's tons of things, probably the majority of things I've tried haven't worked. There's really the things that have worked over time, which is write more books, build up an email list, continue to connect with my readers. Those things almost always work. It's all the tips and tricks and the ads and the whatnot that will sometimes work, sometimes not, sometimes work for some genres, sometimes not work for others.
Yeah, I love that support about like reminder, right? Because we're all workshopping here. We're all labbing together, right? So that's a great reminder. I wonder if in your work so far, if you've ever tested with children's books, like as targeting to parents, if you've ever tested using the nonfiction approach. And I'll tell you why I ask. It's because another person that we've had on the podcast, Crystal Swain Bates, her biggest book, and she's got a lot of success, but her biggest book is Big Hair, Don't Care. right? Which is a picture book that is really it's a cute little story, but like the benefit of it is the thing that she only talks about in the book description. Like the book's description only says what parents can get for their children from the book, and like it's done really, really well. So then I was like, like, is that but also I'm afraid because mine are going okay right now. I'm afraid, you know how like you're like afraid to touch something that's working. Like I don't want to. So I'm wondering if you have ever messed around with that, particularly because like the picture books are really short and there's not going to be a whole lot of suspense about the storyline of what's happening in them. So
I will say that I have not officially run like a legitimate experiment, control group, all of that thing. What I know is anecdotal. What I know is, like people like you who've had results of just improving the description and it leading to better results. So I do think that is certainly worth testing. I think that if it's a book on the sillier spectrum of things, then probably don't need to even worry about it. But if it is kind of more on the benefit side, it could be worth trying. It could be worth adding a little bit. It's tough when you're in a situation like you're in, Marti, where you have the book that's, I'm happy where it's at. It'd be great if it were better, but I'm happy where it's at and don't want that to change in a negative way. And it's scary to make a change at that point, but you have to decide, well, would I be happy with this book at this level forever? Or am I willing to take a chance to potentially improve it by a fair bit? And then if I know that it's converting better, if I'm getting a higher percentage of people who visit the page to actually buy it, well, then more advertising should in turn help it go even better. And you could even sell significantly more, but it could also go worse. But what I always say is that you can always change it back.
So that was sage and like a totally a totally needed thing for me, especially because like my vision board is behind my head and like it says risk meets reward. It's like the biggest words on there, but like obviously I'm still working on that. So thank you. Like I probably
You're
needed
welcome.
that.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have another one, but Ellen, I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
I had another one too, and I'm like, I'm going to be nice and let Marti speak. And then you decided to be nice and let me speak. And then there's this long pause.
You were so nice.
Okay, I'll jump in just quickly. So with book descriptions, like it's like from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is, like test and see what works and don't be scared to like try different things. But with the back of the book, which like is agonizing because yes, I can change it, but kind of like there's going to be, some books that come out with that blurb. Is it a little bit different how you write it? Like the length, is it exactly the same? I don't know.
It's exactly the same. And I'll tell you why. Because right now, very few people are buying paperback books in person when it comes to indies. Yes, if you're at a book show, yes, if you're at an event, sure, they're going to buy the paperback. But even then, they're not buying it because of the book description. They're buying it because they saw your face and they flipped through it and they liked it. For the most part, people are buying paperbacks online. I have been so fortunate to sell thousands and thousands of copies of workbooks for kids, versions of my writing prompts. Obviously not exactly children's books, but they are books targeted at the exact same audience, the parents who look at these. And I have a feeling that my original book description on the paperback has been changed online half a dozen times, but the actual thing on the paperback, I don't even know what's on the back. I literally don't even know what's on the back of those books. And neither do the parents who buy those books, the teachers who buy those books, because they don't look at it either. So the first description you come up with that is finalized and you're happy with, throw it on the back of the paperback, the hardback version of the book, and don't even worry about it from then on, because nobody cares. Nobody looks at it. And
That's so not what I expected you to say. It's awesome.
oh yeah, no, well, I want to make it easier. Like, you worry, like, oh, I changed on this, I better get the proof shipped from KDP Print or CreateSpace, check it out, oh, this is wrong, send it back. No, don't worry about any of that. When it's done, it's done. Get it out there. I have paperbacks. Some of my first paperback workbooks, my mom was like looking for something to do, and so I asked her to proof it, but she's not that good on a computer, so there ended up being like some double periods in there, and I said, you know what, I don't care. Like, no one has given me a bad review on that in 3 years, so even the inside of it has something wrong with it. Not worth me changing it. Got to keep pushing forward. So I just put the same description on the back, and then if I change the digital description later, it's just on the digital version.
Mm-hmm. And you could always, like, even if you're too, like, if that like drives you crazy, that then at least gives you enough permission from Bryan. Thank you, Bryan. That gives you enough permission from Bryan to wait until like Ingram has one of their you can make changes for free time period.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And then go in and make that change for free. Don't pay the $25 change fee, says Bryan.
Although, if you're a member of Ally, you get free changes all year long.
That's true.
But don't waste your time on them.
Right.
Like, it's totally fine. Just do it periodically. That's great. So I have another two-parter, but I'll try to give it to you one part at a time this time. You did great, by the way, last time, balancing those two. That was great. Right. So first part is about proximity. Do you write your own book descriptions, Bryan?
I do. And I think sometimes I shouldn't, because that proximity is difficult. And I think for anyone who doesn't catch your drift on that, if you write your own book description after having written a 30,000 word chapter book or whatnot, you feel like, well, what should I include? What shouldn't I include? And it's especially my YA is 50,000 to 70,000 words. And so that's even more to think about. And what I've come around to, and my co-writer Abigail has really helped me on this, is that if you cannot look at it as condensing a whole mess of a book into 1 or 2 lines and then the rest of the description, if you can not think of it as condensing, but think of it as a choice, it'll be much better. Now, what is this choice? Well, you need to choose what your book's number one main conflict is, if it's fiction, or main takeaway is, if it's nonfiction. Now, you look at something like the Harry Potter series, you could list every character, every subplot, every setting. There's so much to have to stuff into one description. Or you could say that a boy wizard has just found out about magic, but the most powerful evil wizard in the world wants to kill him. And write your description off that. Write your headline off that. You've got 20 words to work with instead of 40,000, 50,000 words to work with. So you make a choice of what is the main conflict. Someone wants this, but something bad is standing in the way. And obviously with a picture book, there might not be a huge conflict, but I'm looking, let's see. We got...
Oh, no. If you give a mouse a cookie, is nothing but conflict. That one is right behind your head.
Exactly. That is full conflict. You've got a mouse in the house. No, you want to just be a nice person and give a mouse a cookie, but the mouse keeps asking for more. That's the conflict.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at what it is that is the main conflict of your book and focus on that, And that keeps it from being a proximity problem. It makes it more into you working from better material to begin with.
Okay, that's extra useful. We have not gotten to the point where we've started trading writing them for people, but like I think that's why like so many people do post their synopsis in our little group, because they're like, I'm too close to this, or because they think it's brilliant and they're wanting a pat on the back, and then we all look at it and we're like, no, no, you should try again. Like, here's some ways to make it different. But it almost always is because they're trying to pack the whole book into a couple of paragraphs, which is, like you were just saying, not a thing that should necessarily be done, or not necessarily not done at all.
Yeah.
That's not the thing. So the second part of that then is, you were saying before about how, like, okay, you want to decide who your audience is, right? And figure out what the frame is. There, the book that you just used, the Laura series, not If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, but actually, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, I have no idea what it says on the back of that. I've owned several copies of that in my lifetime so far, and I have no idea what the synopsis says of it, because it was given to me on a recommendation, or actually, I think particularly for that one, that probably I just read through it because it's a picture book, right? Like I just picked it up and read through it. But with Harry Potter, I also don't know what the synopsis is, and I've also read that book to literally hundreds of kids and read the whole series, right? So then that's hilarious to me. But on the other side of it, like my book that just recently came out, in the reviews on the book so far, the reviews, it's not people saying what's in the synopsis, but they are clearly framed by the synopsis. Does that make sense? It was like they were expecting a thing, and that's literally the thing that they got out. So it's like the thing that's coming out in the reviews. So I almost feel like I planted it, right? So I'm wondering, like, how do you decide where the frame is? Is it just, I'm saying you particularly, not one in general, like when you and your team approach it, how do you guys decide which frame? Because I'm assuming that you're not giving everybody 5 different synopses that they can like split test and work forward from. I mean, it would be ridiculous. I don't think you should. So that I'm assuming you're not. So then how do you decide?
Well, I think that it really does matter on a genre to genre basis. And we mentioned the tone earlier of how we have a description that is, I would say, maybe it's young adult romance. Obviously, it's not going to be about action, so it's not necessarily going to be this fast paced with all these scary villains in there. It's not going to be about fantastical things and use all this flowery language. It's going to be about these kids and them falling in love and going dealing with the obstacles that they're having to deal with. And so that is a certain tone. It is a certain style. And so we, having had a lot of experience with different genres, we kind of know what that is. Now, you said for you what you do, but if it were the general you, I think it's always very helpful to look at the other descriptions in your genre. It's not a 100%, this is always the right thing to do, because I had someone message me saying, oh, well, I write reference books, informational books, and all of those books weren't personal and didn't talk to the reader. I'm like, okay, fine. So that one, you would write a better book description than them because they didn't write a good one. But you want to look at your genre, see what the best-selling books in that genre are focusing on, seeing what their tone is. There are certain genres that do a very different kind of description than we usually do that are first person. And those are usually very sexy books and not children's books. And so don't look at those if you're trying to write children's books. But if you are writing a children's book or a middle grade book, look at the other descriptions, see kind of the frame they put it in. And then you can kind of base your description on at least the tone of that. You don't need to hit every beat that they hit, but at least try to get the tone pretty similar and use all of the other kind of tips and tricks I've put out here that you guys have discussed in order to get it very close to something that your readers would enjoy.
Cool.
So is there sorry, Marty, I've got to say that at least once every interview. Sorry, Marty. I'm going to get a t-shirt. I'm going to get a Sorry, Marty t-shirt. You watch, I'll get one. You know I will. Anyway, I'm still plowing ahead. Somebody in one of the Facebook groups, it was in our kids' Facebook group, and she was like, "What do you think of my, like synopsis?" And everyone was like, and it was quite a long thread, and everyone's giving suggestions. And then she said, "Oh, this, friend of hers who's in traditional publishing gave her this formula, and because I'm going to keep calling you an expert, because you're an expert, I wanted to run the formula past you." Because this is what she said. These are the questions you ask when you write a blurb. So tell me if they're right or wrong. Who? What's his problem? How's he planning to solve it? But, and then, can he?
Mm-hmm. I'd say that works pretty well. It's kind of a reframing of the type of formula I talk about in Sizzling Synopsis.
Okay.
I think that it's not enough to write, just to give that and to have that formula and use it, because there is all the practice that is needed, the nitty gritty, the kind of things you need to do to get better at copywriting, like looking at other copy, not just author copy, like learning kind of which words are stronger versus which words are weaker. There's a lot to learn in the nitty gritty. And you come upon one of the problems that I'm sure you two have found in the author community, which is, oh my gosh, there's a formula. Thank goodness. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to work hard. The formula will save me. And there has never been a time in indie authorhood where that has been true. And so we have to remember that formulas are helpful for guiding us in the right direction, but we're the ones who have to do the work. We're the ones who have to improve at our craft, both inside and outside the book, and it's going to take time. There's no speed up turbo button, unfortunately. And so we have to remember it's about us putting in the work, us learning what to do, and us focusing on the most important things.
Yeah. Great.
So we're almost out of time, but before we don't have you this time, we'll be able to think and have you again. But before we even get to that, I am really curious about, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your decision to rebrand the the Viral Superhero series is a rebranding of your Ted Saves the World series, which I actually have as Ted Saves the World, which I just want to put that out there. Okay, but I would love to hear more about that, because we were talking about being close to your own work and maybe not having that work out, but you write your own synopses. So then that means that you do a good job of being close to your work. So I'm wondering how you ended up coming to the decision and what made, what were the skin pieces? Did your synopsis, for example, change?
Yeah. Well, long story short, I first published that series, and thank you for being an original reader of it, Marty. But I originally published that series in 2014 and 2015, I believe. And it was branded as kind of almost YA urban fantasy in a way. And that was kind of what the covers looked like. That was kind of the way the descriptions went. And at the time, there was not really much in the way of a brand for superhero books. Superhero as a genre on Amazon really started to grow by leaps and bounds over the next 2 years. And that meant there was a cover, kind of a cover readers expected when they were looking for superhero. there was a pace readers expected. There were certain elements readers expected that weren't really established when I first published. I was a little too early, I suppose. And so I went back 2 years later, and with more experience, really 2.5 years later, I decided, look, these books aren't selling anymore. So I'm going to put on what now looks like a young adult superhero cover. I'm going to rewrite book 1, which was my first novel, which was scary and annoying. And we had just had the baby. And so my brain wasn't there, but I rewrote it, cut it down from a 72,000 word novel to a 50,000 word novel, much faster, much stronger on the pacing, and re-put them out there as new products, new Amazon number. So all the reviews were gone, new titles, so I couldn't just port them over. And so went through all of that. And yes, the descriptions changed too, because I was a better description writer 2.5 years later. And so something you can always consider, which is scary, but if you have gained a lot of knowledge and you can see that changing things would be better at a certain point, relaunching is very much an option. Now, there's a lot that goes into a relaunch. I'm actually behind the scenes secretly working on some training about that. But when it comes down to it, if you feel as though you understand your genre better than you did a couple years ago, look and see what everyone else has done in that genre that you may be missed out on, and consider even just changing a couple of slight things or going full on relaunch like I did. There are some opportunities for that to go better. And the series in much less time has sold almost 3 times as many copies as it did originally. So I know that the efforts I put in were worth it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I have to say that I've read the first 2 books in that series, and I thought of them as middle grade. They were paced middle grade, but
yeah.
So I can see that if you were trying to sell a middle grade paced things to a YA audience, that it might have been a little mismatchy there.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, yeah, like the covers now are they look great. They're very YA. And so then that's really cool. But also, dude, risk and reward. Like that's what?
It
like
is
that's
vision board.
vision board. It's like right there.
Mm-hmm.
Risk and reward. Yeah, that's really inspiring. So thank you for sharing that bit with us.
Sure.
Elena, do you have another question before we start to wrap up and let Bryan go?
No, I would just like to know, before Bryan goes, about the courses and, well, the one that you have, obviously, and maybe a clue as to what's coming. I think it's a great way. I know, well, Marti and I both do a lot of courses. It's how we've improved because, okay, I'm going to make a confession. I actually pay Bryan to do my blurbs. So Bryan has done my blurbs. But actually, it's that thing of when you go to do it yourself, you go, I don't know how to do this. So, it would be fantastic, wouldn't it, to feel confident, even if I still continue to get you to do my blurbs, that if I wanted to rejig it or change it a bit, or what often happens is the book changes, so now I have to change your blurb to match my book, which is where I'm at. Tell us about the courses, or the main course.
Sure. Well, I have a course called Selling for Authors, which goes into, which I'm in the process of rebranding as Book Description Mastery, because people really want the book description part. And so,
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And so I have been working on rebranding that, putting that together. For now, you can still go to sellingforauthors.com and you can find some of my free training there. And there you'll get on my email list as well, so that you know when I am relaunching, when I am putting new things out. But I've actually been doing a kind of smaller, shorter 4-week course that just focuses on that ad copy, all important ad copy, the headline, the first line that goes into your book description. And so if you go to sellingforauthors.com, you can find out about that, get more information there, and learn about those. And I love teaching this stuff. There are a few better feelings than when someone does the work, you see them make a huge change. One of my first students recently had her first 5-figure month, which of course is hallowed ground.
Very nice.
And
yeah,
to see her having grown and improved and changed and say, yes, the book descriptions were part of it. Yes, the other things you taught me were part of it. And to see her hitting this big milestone, such a good feeling. And so I love being able to teach, but I also kind of love when you see those results so that you can pat yourself on the back and give them a big thumbs up.
that's great. That's great. Okay, so are there things that you have coming up besides your upcoming coursework that you want people to know about?
Sure. If you are interested in seeing me live in person in Chicago, I am co-running an event called the Sell More Book Show Summit. Sounds familiar. It's kind of the same name as our podcast. And that's May 4th through 6th in Chicago. So if you're in the Midwest or you don't mind traveling to the Midwest, head on down there. That's at sellmorebookshow.com/summit.
Fantastic.
That's
My
amazing.
question
And
is, how do
Chicago
we,
in the first week of May is beautiful.
Yes, it is.
and how do we get you guys to ever come down under? You know, like really, come on.
I want to. We'll let you know how this American event goes, and then if that goes well, maybe we can try some other places. But I've been wanting to go to Australia for a long time, so it's definitely on my list, Elena.
Good. Thank you. That's made me happy. Tell us where else online we can find you, because there's a few different places.
Well, look, if you like podcasts like this one, just go to sellmorebookshow.com or type Sell More Book Show into your favorite podcast listening app, and you'll hear us. We're every Wednesday. We can listen to the latest news in publishing, and then there I can direct you to other places where I do stuff. Just go to the podcast.
All right. Wonderful.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much, Bryan. Maybe we'll be able to have you on again when your secret rebranding project has come out.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Thank you guys so much for having me.
All right. And Elena, will you tell people where they can find us if they need us?
So you can find the episode show notes, and it's all in one tiny place, so you can watch it on YouTube on the page or listen to it at www.indiekidlitpodcast.com. Thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the show. If you have 5 minutes, you're welcome to leave a review, even if it's a great or bad. One word is good. It all really helps gain visibility, and thank you again for tuning in.